Is waiting for us to get started. There we are. Hello, everyone. Once again, it is your favorite TFSS moderator, Evan Johnson, they, them, theirs. I feel like I am becoming a radio talk show personality with as many of these live stream events as I'm doing. If you hear little tippy taps, I'm currently dog sitting, and she's very interested in why I'm talking to my computer. So don't mind me if I'm, petting a pit bull. It's fine. It's a good time. Hey, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for our panelists for joining us tonight. Please, Ray, don't cry. We're going to be talking tonight. It's going to be a continuation of that conversation that we had last week, but this time more directed for our students and our parents of students. We're going to be able to give y'all some education on what federal protections look like for, in particular, our trans students. Again, like I said last week, with the piece of we are primarily a San Diego-based nonprofit, and so a lot of the information that we're going to have that's specific will be specific to the state of California. But it is important that you all know that we did do our research, we did get that national information, and there are protections for our students nationally that we'll be advising you all on. And just because our organization is based in California does not mean we only serve California youth. Those of you who are part of our Huntsville, Alabama chapter know that, but we have clients all across the country, and we are willing to help you navigate this wherever you are. So all that being said, I have slides again. We're going to go through some really text heavy slides for a minute, but I promise you it's all good information. I diluted it as much as I could. I just need to wait for my slides to come up. Beautiful. Hey, look at that. No, you're right. That's what we're doing. We took a lot of this information from some national organizations like the ACLU and the National Center for Trans Equality. These are both national organizations that do a lot by means of helping educate and advocate for, in particular, our LGBTQ and trans students. So this I actually took from ACLU, has a little pamphlet that you can download. It's called Know Your Rights, and I'll actually be posting the link, or Martine will be posting the link through the TransFamily accounts a little bit later in the conversation when we're talking about that website. But they have this quote: "You have the right to be safe at school, and you have the right to be yourself at school." So going into all of this, being able to keep that peace in mind, knowing that who you are is protected, and your identity is protected on a national scale through the Department of Education. And it's just a matter of knowing how to advocate for yourself in those spaces. Okay, so I'm not really going to go into this piece. This is mostly for the parents, because those of us who are part of this community, we kind of already know this. The Trevor Project put out a national survey on LGBTQ youth in 2020, and we saw some pretty harrowing statistics when it comes to our LGBTQ, and in particular our trans students on school campuses. Higher rates of discrimination and verbal harassment against these populations, higher rates of suicidal ideation and self-harm in these populations. And so I don't want to dwell on that piece. This is more of a piece of activism. I just think it's important that we're mindful of this, because these statistics are going to support us as we go into things like advocacy, to be able to say, okay, here's what happens when we don't support. And then Martine, if you could go to the next slide, please. Or not. Oh God, did I take out the slide that I wanted? Oh my goodness, so many things are happening. Hold on, is there another slide back to that? Should be a Trevor Project, there we go. When we are supportive of our LGBTQ youth, the Trevor Project in this same study said that one supportive adult can cut that suicide attempt rate by 40%. It's a pretty significant number, and schools like those big numbers. And so we're able to go into schools and we're saying, listen, we understand, like, you've never had a trans student come out to you before who's wanted to use the right bathroom. We get that this is new for you. We get that you're confused and you don't know how to support this student. Here's why you need to. And so we're able to help navigate those conversations with schools if this is a conversation you want to have with your school. And this piece of being able to say, statistically, we can see that there is a life-saving impact on affirming our LGBTQ students. That does make a difference. Next slide, please, Martine. And of course, all of this, we have to look at it with this lens of intersectionality. For those of you who are under 18, you're going to have an entirely different experience than those of you who are 18 or older. your rights look a little bit different in a school setting. Also pieces like other regions that you may be living in, other identities that you may hold, which impact your school environment other than your gender or sexual orientation. And so it's important that we're mindful that as we're going into this advocacy, of course, the world is going to look different for folks who live in these intersectionalities. And we do need to support in different ways. And sometimes we may need to address the issues that a school is having around racism before we can address the issues that a school is having around transphobia for one student in particular who may be experiencing both. It's so weird not being in charge of my slides because I'm up in Julian. The Wi-Fi is so weird here. So legal protections, primarily legal protections for our LGBTQ folks are through state legislation. And it's a pretty rough moment. So Martine, if you could click so the graphic pops up. Only 17 states, including California, have full protections for gender identity and expression. Click one more time, please. So you can see, looking at this chart of the United States, there are quite a few states with low or negative protections for our LGBTQ populations. And in particular, this graph is for trans and non-binary populations. But I know, looking at this map, it can get kind of frustrating and kind of difficult and kind of heartbreaking to look at. But I want you to keep in mind that schools, for the most part, are ruled by a different set of legislation than state legislation. A lot of times departments of education are putting out their own assembly bills and their own legislation to help protect our students where state or national ordinance may not. Next slide, please. 2020 and 2021 were a hard year for our trans students and our trans youth. There was a lot of terrible headlines that went around especially students and trans athletes accessing sports and competitive teams. Accessing restrooms is an ongoing conversation, accessing gender affirming care. And so with all of these things going on, it's really important that for those of us who are outside of the fight, for those of us who are adults, who are supporting our trans youth, that we're really keeping in mind how this national climate is going to weigh on advocacy and being able to do that self-advocacy, but also how empowering it can be for folks to be able to make change in their schools and to make change in their school districts. So while 2020 and 2021 so far have been pretty hard for those of us in this community, it's also important to note that it is largely our youth who are advocating and making change happen. There's technically no federal laws protecting LGBTQ adults and individuals in employment, housing, education, or public accommodations. If you are of legal voting age and you are in a state that your state representatives have not agreed or not already spoken out publicly about bolstering the Equality Act and pushing the Equality Act through Congress, it is a huge piece of legislation that's going to provide some overarching protections for LGBTQ people federally. So that first map that we were looking at that had all of those orange and dark orange states, that will change completely, and it will now become a national standard. So if you are able to vote, if you're able to call your representatives, if you're comfortable calling your representatives, this is like my one political plug, please, please, please get involved and share your voice, because legislators, they do track who's talking about what when they make those calls, when they send those emails. And so it's really important that we continue to elevate our voices and our experiences. Okay, so here's where we get really text heavy, right? We're gonna go like deep look into some of the laws and protections for our trans and LGBT students. I'm gonna use primarily trans-centric language, but all LGBTQ students, some of these are going to influence. Like Title IX also gives you the right to form a GSA on your campus, right? So obviously that's not a trans exclusive thing. For the nature of this work though, trans students, right? And this information is coming from the National Center for Trans Equality. They have a page on their website that is specifically Know Your Rights Within Schools. It is a great resource for our students to be looking into. So what does Title IX actually say? This is a federal protection that makes sex-based discrimination illegal in schools. It is interpreted in most court systems as protecting our trans students against discrimination or protecting students who don't meet gender expectations. So again, the federal legislation doesn't explicitly say anything about the trans or LGBTQ community, but the interpretation of this law is the one that we're really going to lean into. And so if issues come up in your school where you feel like Title IX is being infringed, that actual body of text isn't going to necessarily be your best tool, but being able to look at other court cases where the interpretation has protected trans folks and identities. And so this is like a pretty broad piece of legislation, of school legislation. This says that you don't have to legally change your name or gender marker to have your name and pronouns respected in your school system or even changed in your school system. We'll talk a little bit later about what specifically that means, but generally you're allowed to have your name changed on things like attendance, any like student website you're using to check grades or log into online classes, your student email, anything that is non-official documentation, you should be allowed to change your name without legally changing your name. You should be allowed access to restrooms and locker rooms that are appropriate to your gender identity or your expressed desire to use certain restrooms and locker rooms. You should have equal opportunities. So like if you are a trans girl in California, you cannot be barred from running for prom queen. You have equal opportunities to your cisgender peers. Freedom in your gender expression. Our trans students are not held to a different standard of expressing their gender where we have to confine ourselves to a certain gender expression in order to be taken seriously in our gender identity. We are given that freedom and freedom of privacy in our identity, our names, and our medical information. The school cannot disclose to anyone outside of you and if your parents, if you're over or if you're under 18, about your identity. They can't disclose it to other parents. They can't even disclose it to other teachers on campus if you only tell one teacher. We'll talk a little bit more about this privacy piece later with another piece of legislation, but know that your privacy as a person is protected when you share with your school that you identify as trans. And then finally, yes, that piece of your right to form a GSA on campus. If you want to get a GSA started and you don't even know where to begin, our organization is pretty pushy when it comes to getting GSAs on campus. And by our organization, I mean me. So if you need help getting your GSA started on campus, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to have my contact information a little bit later on in this presentation, and you are welcome to reach out to me. And I would love to chat with you about how we can get a gender sexuality alliance or a gay straight alliance or whatever sort of rainbow, Skittles, spectrum club you would like to see on your campus. I do see a comment popping up. What is the recourse when somebody violates the student's privacy? We will be talking about that a little bit later. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I have slides, I have a plan. So some other laws just really quickly, we have the Equal Access Act. This just allows all student organizations to be treated equally on campus. This applies to GSAs. So a GSA cannot be banned from your school. If a student wants a GSA on campus, the school has to give equal opportunity for that club to start and equal opportunity for that club to participate in school events. FERPA is that other student privacy piece. It is the Family Education Something Privacy Act. But schools cannot disclose a student's trans identity without permission from that student and their parents. Again, if that student is under 18, parent disclosure does become a factor. And then your First Amendment. Your First Amendment is your protection of speech and expression. You're allowed to dress and express your gender identity the way that you want. You're allowed to talk about being trans at school. You're allowed to write about being trans. You're allowed to talk about trans stories. This is that piece of not being confined to like a don't ask, don't tell sort of mentality. Our First Amendment protects us from this. Okay, so this is that piece, and this is going to feed into Spring's question about what's the recourse when a student violates or when the school violates a student's privacy. So this is first with this piece of what if you're being discriminated against at school, either by a peer or a teacher or another school employee. The first step is always to tell your school. You're going to want to document every single thing that happens with as much detail as possible. And again, this is coming from the Trans Center or the National Center for Trans Equality, that same Know Your Rights link that we'll be posting a little bit later tonight. So reaching out to your school or your district, getting in written word what their policies are on bullying and harassment, specifically being able to ask for a non-discrimination policy and an anti-bullying policy. If you're nervous about talking to your school, you don't know how to have this conversation, or you want to protect your own privacy while navigating this conversation, please feel free to reach out to us. You can either reach out to me directly at my line, Evan at TransFamily SOS, and then that phone number on there you can either call or text, or you can reach out to our general info line. Who else can you reach out to if your school isn't supporting you? GLSEN is the Gay and Lesbian Student Education Network. They specifically work with LGBTQ students in the school setting. ACLU does some phenomenal advocacy for folks of all sorts of marginalized identities. They do a lot of wonderful work in partnership with other organizations for supporting our LGBTQ students. And of course, us, we are also a resource for you. So what about your name and pronouns? There's no federal law that prevents schools from updating a student's records to match expressed name and pronouns. Your school, and this is that piece that I was talking about a little bit earlier, your school only has to have your legal name on school transcripts according to the federal interpretation from the Department of Education. In California, the State Department of Education also says that all non-official documentation can have your expressed name and pronouns. This is interpreted through AB 1266. Official documentation are considered against school transcripts and state testing. But other than that, you should be able to have your expressed name and gender marker on all written documentation. And with this piece of FERPA and with that piece of privacy, any documentation like a birth certificate or any other verification of address that does have dead name or legal name on it, your school should be making extra efforts to make sure that this information is kept private. Next slide, please. I feel like I'm talking really quickly. So it is, and this is the actual answer to Spring's question, right? What's the recourse when somebody violates Title IX? It is the Department of Education's job to follow up with any school districts or school sites not upholding Title IX. So you can file a report with the DOE. Again, file as soon as possible. Technically, there's a 180-day period, which is like so much longer than it seems like. But if you file later than this timeline, you can actually explain why and ask for an exception. So if it's something like, I wasn't out at home and I didn't feel safe to disclose what was going on to me at school, or I was scared because of the threats that were being made against me to make any sort of report, then the investigation will put that into consideration. When the complaint on the complaint form, there's a piece that'll ask what type of discrimination you faced. This is considered sex-based discrimination because that is what is written in Title IX. It is a sex-based discrimination law. You have to complete the entire form. If you leave anything blank, they're actually not going to follow up with you according to the things that I was reading up on. So please fill out as much information as possible, as many details as possible, and make sure that you're filling out every section. Your complaints are confidential. Your school cannot punish you or retaliate against you for filing a complaint with the DOE. And you also don't have to be the person who experienced the discrimination to file on their behalf. So parents of young kids, you're able to file on your child's behalf. If you have a friend who doesn't feel safe to make the report themselves, you're able to file on their behalf if you have a sibling. So keeping in mind, you do not have to be the individual who experienced it. And then depending on state by state, obviously it's going to vary how state interpretation goes. In a state like California, you have a pretty good chance of seeing affirming follow-up, but you can also follow up with your state's Department of Education. So some other questions, do your rate change if you're not out to your parents? Absolutely not. Your school also doesn't hold the right to tell your parents if you come out at school and not at home, but your school and the person you're coming out to may not know that. So please be sure to tell them if you're coming out to your school counselor or a school social worker, please be sure to explicitly tell them, do not tell my parents. And if they ask you questions about it, you can say it is a protection of FERPA. It's one of my protections as a student. You cannot tell my parents this information. And of course, that is going to change what the conversation looks like and what your school is able to do to support you. Things like changing the name that presents on like a grade book. Your parents are going to have access to that, right? Your parents are going to see that. And so being able to have those conversations. Can you play sports with your identified gender? This varies state by state. A lot of legislation has been happening in the past year and a half around our trans students. Some states may require a student to have been on HRT for their identified gender for a certain amount of time before they're allowed to participate in state sports. So that's something to follow up with your state legislation. If you check out the ACLU Know Your Rights, and this is that guidebook for trans and gender nonconforming students, they actually have a link where you can check what your state says and what your state's current stance is when it comes to trans students in sports. And then this is another plug for the organization, right? Because like I love the work that I do, and a part of the work that I do, I work specifically with our youth. And so this is very near and dear to my heart, but we published an LGBTQ youth standards of care in partnership with a bunch of other youth serving LGBTQ orgs in San Diego. It is a huge, beautiful, phenomenal document with so much information about how schools can better support their LGBTQ students. And so if you have well-intentioned teachers or counselors who want to support you or your student, please be sure to send them this link, and they can absolutely access these resources, and we're happy to also help them. I said this last week in the live stream, when we were talking to educators, but a part of the services that TransFamily offers is being able to provide training for school sites and school districts. We have a couple of MOUs with a couple of different districts, and so that means we are contracted partners for some school districts. And hey, that makes it so much easier to get into other school districts, right? So please don't be afraid to reach out to us. No ask is too big or too small. We are happy to help and be of service to this population. And I think I may have one more slide, but I think I'm done with my slides. And so we can talk about fun stuff. Yeah, I'm done with my slides. Oh my gosh, look at me, I'm amazing. So this is my beautiful panel, my extended panel. If you joined us last week, we have doubled in size, which is so exciting. So we're gonna go around, I'm gonna call out as I see it on my screen, but if you wanna introduce yourselves, let's do name, pronouns, and who do you want to thank today? Just like, who do you want to thank for being here today, right? So like, I'll go first. I'll demonstrate. I don't know. Again, if you're tuning in late, my name is Evan. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. And I would like to thank today my parents, because I had a really cool meeting this morning with some folks at the school district that I graduated from. And so I was remembering a lot about when I first came out and how far my parents have come in supporting and affirming me. And it's a pretty wonderful conversation that I got to have. So that's who I'm thankful for today and who I'm grateful for today. So Finley, I see you first.
Hi, I'm Finley. I use he, him pronouns, and I'd like to thank the parents who are here today to support their students. It's really important, parents who support their students, and not every trans kid is that lucky. So I just want to thank y'all for being here.
Thank you, Finley. Grayson?
Hi, I'm Grayson or Gray. I use he, him, his, or they, them, their pronouns. I would like to thank Evan, because Evan is our forever facilitator and host, basically a talk show host at this point. They always do a fantastic job, so I'd like to thank them.
Oh, thank you. Gregory?
Hey everybody, I'm Gregory. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. And I want to thank all the teachers and staff and people that I just met in my high school and college experience that, helped me to join GSAs or just were super supportive of me when I didn't have a supportive family, and having those resources was home for me. So I really appreciate all the people who stood up for me.
Absolutely. And Elio?
Hi everyone, my name is Elio. I use he, they pronouns. I want to thank my parents. I'm currently away at college and they've done a lot to support me both in getting here to university and just in life and through my transition. I also want to apologize. I am in a dorm room, so there is a lot of noise. And there are also a lot of students using the exact same Wi-Fi line at the exact same time on the exact same day. So if I'm cutting out, if I'm freezing, if my audio is a little bit janky, blame the other students. I'm so sorry.
That's absolutely fair. You know, we're all working with what we've got. Thank you all for participating in that little question. I just think it's nice every once in a while to have like a happy little moment. Please, there is a pit bull crying at my feet. Okay, so let's get started, right? So to my, I feel like a YouTuber who's doing like an unboxing video. Let's get started. Okay. I'm so old. All right. So we have all, to my knowledge, we all came out at different stages in our education at different years. Some of us were never out at the high school or public school level. Some of us came out pretty quickly. And so I think we all bring something different to this table when it comes to learning advocacy at the school setting. And what that looks like for them in particular. And so I'm just wondering if anyone in particular is wanting to share, she's got so many words for me, wanting to share what advocacy and activism has looked like on your school campus, and what you have done in particular, that you want to share and that you think that other trans students could benefit from hearing. I'm gonna mute myself and actually turn off my camera for a second, but I'm still here and speak amongst yourselves.
Well, to my knowledge, I'm currently in high school, so I came out, let's see, must have been last year. I've also moved schools 3 times in 3 years, so I've gotten a very wide range of experiences, shall we say. Freshman year, I was at one of the largest public high schools in San Diego. I then, sophomore year, the COVID pandemic year, moved to an all-girls Catholic school. I am now at a different high school that is not an all-girls Catholic school. So I have had quite a range of experiences coming out in kind of a high school, public school setting, also a religious setting there. So to me, advocacy looks so different, but it feels the same because obviously the scenario in which I was in changed rapidly, drastically, about sort of the demographic of the school, of the teachers, of the community, even the religious makeup. Yet the people who had little, rainbow flags on their door or made an effort to ask me about my pronouns or ask just the students in general about their pronouns when they were doing those sort of icebreaker kind of things, like that to me felt the same, and it felt like safe, and like I didn't have to kind of be as on edge and being like, oh, if I talk to this teacher and correct them about my pronouns, like how will this affect my life? Or if I am kind of that way around other students, I'm like, oh, if I do X, Y, Z, am I going to get harassed? So I think that this advocacy can look really different. It just has to do with creating a space in which the students and the people that we're serving and working for and who need the support can receive it and can appreciate it.
Thank you, Gray. I think that brings up a huge point of how visible support from adults on campus can impact our safety and security on campus to advocate for ourselves. It may be easier for a student to walk up to a teacher and say, hey, my legal name is this, but I would really prefer it if you would call me this, if they saw that teacher had like a safe space sticker on their window. So absolutely being mindful of how school climate may impact your students' experience and their safety. Maybe they're really comfortable being out at home, but at school they would prefer to be stealth or not disclose their identity at all. So just to refresh myself and reorient myself now that I have removed a dog from my vicinity, and I miss her dearly already because of her big square head that was sitting on my feet, but it's fine. What for the rest of our panelists, and thank you, Gray, for getting us started, but what did advocacy look like for you in your high school settings? For the three of you who have already graduated high school in particular, what was that like for you? And give us a little bit context about when you graduated and when these kind of scenarios were happening, if you could.
I came out in 2016 during my sophomore year of high school, towards the end of my sophomore year of high school. And I am now graduated. I go to university. I'm starting my third year in university. And I was out in high school, following 2016. And then my first year of college, I decided to go stealth because I didn't have a great experience being out in high school. And then eventually after being at my school for about a year, I felt comfortable being out again. So I have kind of the experience of being out, being stealth, and then being out again. For me personally, advocacy looked, it was a little different because, when I was out, obviously I definitely in my high school, because I was one of the few like trans kids, and definitely like the first trans kid in my year to come out. I definitely had to like sort of start from the bottom and work my way up to trying to like talking to teachers. And it was rocky. My school didn't really know how to handle that situation. But luckily, Evan and TransFamily Support Services in general were able to help me with some of those difficulties. And I also had some really great teachers that were able to be good advocates for me. In college, when I was stealth, I obviously, didn't share my identity because I wasn't really sure what the campus community was going to be like. But for context, I go to UCSD, and I now work at the center, the LGBT Resource Center on that campus, and it's a really great resource. And so finding that center and that community there made me feel a lot more comfortable being out. And now, the work that I do there is really on trying to like educate the campus community and make sure that other students feel like UCSD is a safe place for them to be out and be who they are.
Thank you, Finley. And I actually want to take a second to talk about your decision to go stealth for your first year of college and to not disclose your trans identity for that basis of, getting a better idea of what was campus culture like, what were your peers or your professors going to think. And anyone is, of course, open to answering this question, but, how does being an out trans person change what education looks like for you? Like I know for myself personally, when I had come out in high school and it was my senior year, this was 2016 was my senior year, Finley. So hate that for me personally. I am ever aging. But when I came out, it was all of a sudden, when I was taking my civics class, any issue around the LGBTQ community, I was now looked at as an expert, where I didn't have expertise. And so my education was actually a back burner to now I'm expected to advocate for an entire community, educate on the basis of an entire community, all for the sake of, I just wanted to be called the right name. And so I think a lot of the times teachers kind of make this assumption that just because we're out or just because we disclose an LGBTQ identity, we're open to becoming a spokesperson or an activist. And so to kind of derail for a second from my first question, how does that impact your decision to either be out or not, or who you tell or what spaces you're out in?
I can share a little bit about that. So I had a really interesting high school experience where I was actually like very accepted by my peers and like people in my social circle, but I wasn't out at home because it wasn't safe for me. And so like my school environment became the place where I felt comfortable being out, and I would be able to go to the GSAs and like help volunteer and be able to like build my life that way. But I had also come out as a sophomore in 2013, and as a junior, I started out my year pretty good, and then things kind of fell apart. So I decided to leave that school and do charter school at home. And that opportunity actually gave me the freedom to work on my gender experience and explore those things and come to the person that I am today, and then going back to that same school as a senior with new name and pronouns, and like people that I had known before either didn't recognize me or didn't care. And so it was just kind of weird, like being able to take that break and like not have to physically be transitioning or to like go through that process in the same school setting where I had known the same class since kindergarten. And so for me, like what was really helpful was being able to present my name and pronouns to my teachers. And before knowing any of the laws or resources that we have now, I just straight up wrote them a letter and said, hey, these are my name and pronouns, and I need to change it in your roster. And of course, without my parents' permission or their knowledge, I was still able to do that, which was great. And, you know, I started volunteering with the GSA, and that led into this role that I have today, where I'm connected to other resource centers and just people in my area that I've known for a really long time. And it's just given me such amazing like empowerment and sense of self, and to be able to give back to the community that's given so much to me has been so life-changing. But you know, just as a student, like not having to worry about being misgendered or misnamed in school kept me focused on my grades and focused on graduating. And I was just really grateful to have supportive teachers and, you know, staff members that just knew me, and, you know, people in this community that were really supportive for me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, and especially with that piece of like stepping away from the public school environment while you were figuring out and exploring your gender identity, and not having to almost perform your transition or maybe the stages of questioning that might have gone into the comfort with your gender identity, and then being able to return to a traditional school setting as your firm self, knowing who you were, and being in that space where it's like, all right, they're not going to be able to ask questions because I haven't given them space for asking questions. So like, we're cool. And I know, so I've known all of you for quite some time now. And so I know a lot about all of your stories. So I'm going to pick for a second on Elio. I know, Elio, you made the decision not to come out as trans until I think like midway into your senior year. And then COVID happened. And so what was navigating the virtual world like as a like freshly out trans person? What did that look like for you?
Well, school in general, once COVID hit, was very different, as we all remember, because, you know, most teachers weren't super prepared and most school systems weren't super prepared for it. And so I actually feel like I kind of got it a little bit easy transitioning during a time when I wasn't interacting with my peers face to face, because kind of like Gregory mentioned how they took a step back, I got an involuntary break from having to interact with people and perform my transition. And so by the time like I was seeing people again, is now a sophomore in college, and there's only one person from my high school that goes to my university. So ultimately it didn't really matter. But that was something that I experienced. Another thing that was different was this whole idea of like names and pronouns being in your Zoom name. Because, you know, in person, when you're kind of advocating for yourself as a student, you either, you know, go up to your teacher in person, face to face, or through email, and is like, hi, my name and pronoun is actually this, blah, 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 blah. Or it's the dreaded roll call where you get dead named and then you have to make a whole deal of, actually, that's not my name. And then it becomes a whole conversation about you. But being able to just put that in your Zoom name and not having to explain or justify that to your peers is something that I thought was really nice. Obviously, that is conditional. I'm sure that there are some schools that don't allow students to change their names over Zoom or add pronouns, which I don't think is right. But this is not time for Elio opinions. But that's kind of how my high school experience, at least my senior year, with being a newly out trans person and then the pandemic happening, kind of went.
Elio, I do want to say for a second, this is actually time for Elio opinions. That's why you were brought on as a panelist. All of you is because we want to hear your opinions, and that absolutely is a piece of it. Do you want to talk a little bit more about, how can students advocate within their schools if maybe schools don't have their Zoom classrooms set up that you can change your name and pronouns? How do you advocate for yourself in those positions? Were you personally ever in one of those positions? And if anyone else wants to hop in on that one, Gray, especially since you are still in the high school world, if the two of you want to kind of chat a little bit about that, I think we have a lot of kiddos who would probably appreciate it.
I can start with this one. So I've never had to deal with that. My school is, the advocacy at my school, I would say, is pretty performative, which works in some instances, but in other instances, it's very obvious that if something were to happen, there wouldn't be a lot of support. But I would say that depending on the situation that you find yourself in is kind of the way to advocate for yourself. So for example, if it's a teacher classroom policy where the teacher is saying that they don't want students to change their Zoom name, that could be something you either bring up to the teacher in an email or to your counselor. And something that I feel like a lot of students, at least I did, don't realize is that you can request to change a teacher. If you're in high school and there are 3 teachers teaching mathematics and one of them is not letting you change your Zoom name, you can request to be put in the other classrooms. I mean, it obviously depends on space and availability and the rest of your schedule, but that is an option to be asked. And you don't have to disclose to your counselor why you want to move classrooms. You can just say, hi, I just want to be in period 3 instead of period 6. And so that's something you can do. If it's a school type policy, I think that that's a little bit harder to deal with, especially if, your school district is one that isn't very supportive of LGBTQ students. But that might be something to bring up with this idea of like your freedom of speech and being able to express yourself. So I think that's Title IX. But that could be something, a way for you to advocate if you're unable to find those channels where you yourself can advocate for yourself, going bigger scale and saying, oh, well, me being unable to change my name is a violation of my First Amendment rights.
Absolutely. That's definitely a part of it. The piece of being able to see, is it this one teacher who just doesn't understand why it's important for students to be able to change their name? Is it a school that is intentionally stonewalling a trans student from changing their name? Being able to change what your approach is going to look like based on the scenarios. And Grayson, if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah. It's just, I think the best kind of advice that I can extend that is universal, because everybody has a very different scenario and a different situation with their district or their teacher or their home life. It's a very individualized scenario, depending on many factors in your life, is that self-advocacy is really hard. I know that even I, comfortable in myself and my identity, like, in my transition in myself, I don't have an issue with it, but I know sometimes if somebody uses the incorrect pronouns with me, I'm just like, okay, like I just don't have the energy that day to kind of, I guess, stick up for myself in a lot of ways, or I don't have the energy to kind of fight that fight with a teacher who's just really not getting it, or somebody who just really isn't getting it. And it's difficult and it's draining, especially when you're in an environment when you're supposed to be learning and you are just having a good time, trying to take notes in whatever class you're in, and somebody just dead names you. It's like, it's a very difficult situation to deal with, or a difficult situation when someone misgenders you. And that we should have kind of an extended amount of compassion for, other trans and LGBTQ plus students whose identities are being like affronted and kind of inadvertently, attacked in a lot of ways just in a school setting, and that it's hard. School's already hard. You all remember the drama and the issues of high school and whatever, and just add, just it's like another layer that you have to deal with as a person. So I think that being patient and kind to yourself and understanding that advocacy for yourself and for others is kind of a long, sometimes uphill battle. And maybe you're not the person to do that at your school. You know what I mean? Maybe you don't have the extended energy to be the one who's going to change your entire school district to suddenly be super inclusive. So yeah, I guess that's all I can really extend, is that like I'm living it and I've been through a lot of it, and that it's a difficult situation that we just kind of need to be kinder to ourselves, and make sure we understand that we're just trying our best, and look out for yourself.
Absolutely. And Gray, that actually brings me very neatly to my final question for all of you, and this is for all of you to answer. How do you, as a trans student who is either out or closeted, regardless, how do you continue to be resilient? What keeps you hopeful through the hard times? What are good times? What pearl of wisdom would you have for trans students who are currently trying to figure it out? So whoever wants to take that one first, this is for all of you. I want all of you to answer it, because I like all of your thoughts.
I think personally what kept me going in high school, through a difficult time, was just thinking about like, I'm going to do something with these experiences later. I'm going to take, the things that I've experienced, this pain, this feelings, and this understanding, and do something with it. Because, experiencing marginalization, discrimination, you have this understanding and able to relate to other people who've experienced those things. And I think it gives you a level of sensitivity that other people may not have, who have like more privileged identities. And I think that having those experiences are, even though they're difficult, are valuable and can inform work. And, today I'm doing, my undergraduate honors thesis on something related to my identity. And I think, just every day I try to make like the high school kid that I was proud, and try to take, those experiences and make something good from it. And so I think that for the trans kids out there, knowing that, high school is difficult for any kid, but especially trans and other kids who are marginalized. And I think that remembering that you can take these experiences and do something great with it, you can learn from this, and you can make sure that other kids don't experience the things that you did. And I think that is a real reason to keep going.
I will say I had actually a really great experience the other day. I was in a Spanish class just a few days ago, and the teacher brought up, we were talking about language. Obviously, we're in a language class. He was talking about inclusive language because he had seen something on social media. In Spanish, particularly, everything is very gendered. It's either like a masculine or a feminine, even objects, especially people as well. So he was talking about the kind of evolution of Spanish and how they started changing certain pronouns to be more gender inclusive, and talking about being inclusive of non-binary and gender non-conforming people. And I was just like, that's fantastic. That's so cool. And a lot of the kids seem really checked out. You know how kids are. They're just kind of like sitting around on their phones or picking their noses, or I don't even know. But I was really like, hey, that's super cool. And I was just very, engaged in the conversation, and I was like talking, and adding to what he was saying, and I don't know, I guess I felt like maybe I got through to some people, or somebody maybe learned something, or just kind of heard something that was like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe, I'll think a little bit deeper about that. So just having little experiences like that, or having a teacher that's just a teacher who's in the community, who just is like out and just cool about it. I mean, just little things like that really give you just something, just a little pep in your step, like something to kind of get through the harassment that a lot of kids can endure, or even just the mental kind of a toughness that you need to have in order to be kind of like trans, and even in high school. So yeah, that's having little moments like that and things like that make me feel, I don't know, I mean, good on a Monday morning, right?
Absolutely. And for me, it was something similar of, you know, I had one teacher who had like polite questions about my gender identity. And I think I told this story last week when we were chatting with teachers. But I had a teacher at my high school who asked me one morning if I was Mr. or Miss Johnson. And I said, well, I don't know. And so we looked it up together. What was the gender neutral honorific? And I've carried that with me throughout my entire adulthood, because that one little moment made such a huge difference to my experience in my high school.
I'd say for myself that, you know, high school is a really pivotal time to be learning about yourself and just who you want to be in your future and just who you are at that present moment. And I needed that community of other LGBTQ kids to get through. And I don't think that I would have made it without having those GSAs and without like the resources and knowledge that was available to me. And I was really inspired by older adults who were out and people on social media or just in movies and people in my community who were, you know, living their lives and they were thriving and sharing their successes. And that's what was really inspirational to me. And I had a deep desire to give back to my community and like help out as many people as I can. And then I realized getting into college that I started to become the person that I was looking up to, or become the person that, you know, I needed when I was in high school. And that's what really keeps me going today, is knowing that the work that I'm doing now is like me giving back to my younger self and me giving back to me at 10 years old, 12 years old, 16, and like being able to really lead as an example to like people that are, you know, searching for themselves, and in no like egotistical way whatsoever, but just like being able to represent this community and like help people out and, you know, just give back is been the thing that's been keeping me going. And, you know, when I'm 40 years old, 50 years old, there's going to be kids that are watching this video or, you know, whatever future we have, where they'll see that we're thriving and we're living our best lives. And that's what's been really helpful for me.
Oh, my turn. For me, I would say find community. And community can really be anything. You know, it can be that one teacher that lets you sit in their classroom during lunch. Community can be your GSA or the students that are like you, because I guarantee statistically you are not the only person at your school that is in the LGBTQ community. And community can also just be, you know, friends online that you can come home to and be like, y'all, you cannot believe the day I just had, and just rant to. But I would definitely say that finding any sort of community is really helpful and really helped me when I was in high school.
Absolutely. Ugh. See, this is why I love you all and why I keep bringing you on to things. Some really wonderful things shared around, you know, finding security in yourself. I had a professor when I was finishing up my BSW who always said, find your why. And for me, Gregory, my why is, you know, I do social work, I do this work so I can be who I needed last year. And that's ongoing. You know, it's who I was literally last year. It's who I was when I was 18, 16, like you just said. It was that huge piece of seeing in yourself what you never got to see in your adults when you were that age. And then Elio, that piece of finding community wherever it comes from and in whatever shape and form it is. Absolutely wonderful. It is 5:59. See, of course, when I have all my panelists and we're having wonderful, beautiful discussions, we only have an hour together. Next time we have the four of you all together chatting, we'll definitely make for more time, because I think you all could guide us through an entire like 90 minutes of just beautiful discussion around advocacy and caring for yourself and protecting yourself in that advocacy. So thank you all so much for sharing. Thank you to those of you who have watched tonight and have joined us for this past hour. We are here, you know, TransFamily Support Services here as an entity, but also our trans students are here. They're present. They are ready to advocate for themselves and their peers, even if they're not disclosing that they're advocating for themselves in that moment, right? And to our youth who tuned in, our kiddos who are watching, especially our kiddos who are part of our youth programming and recognize some of these spaces, know how valuable you are to this community and know how valuable you are to this work. I would not be here without the youth who are guiding me through the work that I'm doing. So I really appreciate you all taking time to join us tonight. I really appreciate our panelists taking time to join us tonight. And all that being said, one final plug. If you need any support, if you need any help navigating advocacy, education in your school, in your district, with your church group, with your sports team, whoever it is, we want to talk to them. You know, we want to help folks support you and affirm you and understand you. We have events that are coming up like virtually all throughout the month. We have things that are in the works. One of the things that we have coming up on Saturday, we're having an event for folks who are interested in transmasculinization, medical transition and surgery options with a surgeon who does these procedures, right? So that is a live stream event that we will be also hosting similar to this one. If that's something you're curious about, they're going to talk about things like phalloplasties, metoidioplasties, top surgery, facial masculinization, body sculpting, whatever that looks like, all the different surgical options that are available to you to masculinize your body. And then we're also going to be having a similar event for trans feminine options as well later on in this month. So I want to give us all the dignity of the time that we signed up for. We did sign up for an event that ends at 6 p.m. and it is 6:01. So again, thank you all so much for being here. You are so valuable and valued and appreciated, in particular by me, but I assume by many. So thank you for your time. Have a great rest of your night, and we hope to see you really soon. Bye, everyone.